and welcome to another video from Doodle Bliss with Jane Madej. It's a very hot day today, so I decided a good thing to do would be to do a tutorial about coloring snow. So maybe that'll help us feel a little bit cooler. Now, a lot of people ask about coloring snow because they don't really understand that the shading in snow has a lot of color in it. It isn't just a plain gray, and you don't need to color it with white. You can leave the white as plain paper. Now, what I'm going to use today is watercolor. I've just got regular watercolors from Shinhan there. And I'm going to start by doing a blue sky vignette around the snowman. It helps if you have a white object if you do a color around it. That helps the white stand out. So we'll just do a little bit of blue sky around him. Now these theories are the same if you are using markers or colored pencils or whatever your favorite medium is. But I decided to use watercolor just because that's my favorite. So we'll fill in all this blue here. If you want a softer edge to the vignette, you can wet the paper first before you go to color. Wet it with clean water. What I'm going to do is just soften the edge with a little bit of clean water on my paintbrush there, but I am not really too concerned with how soft the edge looks. It doesn't really bother me. So there we go. We've got blue sky area around him there. I went ahead and did the drawing with an ink line to make it easier for you to see. Now the next thing we're going to do is start doing the shading on the snowman himself. Let's just give this sky a little bit of a zap. It's still a little damp, but that's okay. Now, snow is going to reflect the colors of the sky. That's why it's got colors in the shading rather than just plain gray. So we're going to start by adding some blue here to the shading, to the shadows. Now notice I don't go all the way to the edge. You should leave a little bit of reflected light there, and that makes it look more round. So here we go. Gonna leave some more reflected light around his arms there too. And I'm softening the edges with the clean water on the brush. So you can see in this one, I've decided that my light is coming from the left side of the page. You always want to consider where your light is coming from before you start. And I'm going to do some shading around his cold buttons here to make it look like they're pushed into the snow. Same with his features. All these things are pushed into the snow. Like this. Okay, let's zap that a little bit, help that to dry. Now I like to add a little bit more color. Imagine that it is maybe sunset or sunrise, and so there's a little bit of pink in the sky. And so I add just a little bit of a pinky purple. And I think that really helps add depth and color to the snow. It just makes the whole thing look a bit more rich, a bit more interesting. That part of the paint there was not completely dry, so that has lifted a bit of that. We'll go back to that in a few minutes after that has dried a bit better. That's one nice thing about watercolor, is you can lift it up, change things around, blot it a little bit. So you don't really need to be afraid of it. So let's put that blue back in there, and we will try that again in a few minutes. Let's also add a little bit of the blue to the snow around him. Make it look like he's actually in that snowdrift with a little bit of shading there. There we go. And we'll add just a little bit slightly darker shadows under his arms to make that really look like they're solid. Okay, back to a bit more pink. Let's try this around his face again. A little bit around his buttons. There we go. That looks a bit better. Okay, and now we can start thinking about coloring in the details. Let's make this a bit darker where he's actually going into the, there. So we want to use some black for his buttons and his eyes and features. We'll use red for his hat and green for his scarf to make some nice festive colors there. It's always handy to keep a hairdryer or a heat gun around when you're doing watercolor to help those layers dry. So now let's get some black. Oops, sorry, I bumped the camera there a little bit. We've got his eyes. His mouth. His buttons. Whoops. Part of the problem when I am making these videos is that I try and do everything in too much of a hurry, and so sometimes things aren't as dry as they should be. So let's get some red. And you can also use markers, colored pencils, anything you like if that helps you feel more comfortable. For example, let's do some, these are Tombow watercolor brush markers that you can use if you feel like it. Let's see. Let's see if it's dry enough to go. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep bonking the camera. Let's see if it's dry enough to go back in and fix the smile. Here we go. And finally, we'll add some shading and highlights to the rest of him. Let's just give a little bit more of a tweak to his arms. And shade the underside of his nose. We can add shading to the scarf. We did these in markers, but this is they're watercolor markers, so you can go ahead and work on top of them with watercolor, more markers, colored pencil, whatever you feel comfortable with. And let's see, I want to do some shading on the hat. Here again, I'm making sure that my light source is coming from the left, so the shading is going to go on the right. And finally, what I want to do is add some highlights. Highlights are very important. I like to use these jars of Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. It's a kind of white gouache, an opaque watercolor. You can also use a white paint pen or a gel pen, but I like to use, or white gouache from a tube. But I like to use this kind. And we'll add some. See what a difference it makes when you start adding the highlights. It just brings everything to life. Very important to add them on his buttons. Make them shiny. Little bit on the scarf. And see, that's made a big difference to how bright and happy he actually looks. So you can keep adding more details, going in and adding more shading or patterns to his scarf or hat as much as you want. But that shows you how when you are coloring snow, it's a good idea to use actual colors like blues and purples and pinks rather than a plain gray. So I hope you enjoyed this video and join me again next time on Doodle Bliss. Thanks a lot.